talent. I think I've acquired a way of expressing my enthusiasm for this and for that. I like talking to the engineers first and say, hey, really, can we do that? Can we really do that? Think of how things work. I'm not interested in just the shape.
So Peter, thank you for joining us on this podcast. May I begin by understanding the reason that you pursued a career in architecture and design?
Well, it's funny because my parents were not remotely related to architecture. My father was an army officer. My mother was a housewife, and but she had wanted to be at art school. Her parents were too poor for her to go. And my father was always interested in the arts, but when I was very young, he had the job of taking buildings for the use of army. And I used to go around with him in the car to see these big Italianate villas, and he would then say, we put 10 tanks there or whatever, a platoon of soldiers there. I watched him choose a site for a camp. And suddenly the camp was there, and I thought, this is a nice game. And because my mother was also was artistic, I was taken as a young age to many exhibitions. I saw a lot of buildings and a lot of exhibitions. I'm not a naturally good drawer. I've learned to draw, and now people buy my drawings in galleries. But I was also, I think a very important point here, I moved from town to town because he was in the army. As a little kid and as a teenager, I became familiar with having to understand and adapt to a new town. So I got a sniff for sort of saying, that's probably where the rich people live. That's probably where the fish and chip shop is. That's probably where my school's going to be. That's where they have a castle and a river, usually. And you'd find that there were reassuring characteristics. I became interested in towns because I was having to absorb every year or so a new town, a new place, a new physiognomy. And then I just got interested in architecture, and by the age of 12, 13, 14, I was reading books about architecture. And I went very early to architecture school. I went to an old-fashioned little local architecture department of an art school, which had a very old-fashioned approach. But I'd already been through the local city library and read lots and lots of things about modern architecture. I knew about Le Corbusier at the age of 14. And so by 16, when I went to the college, I was already in the game. And I'm an enthusiast. I think primarily, I don't think I have natural artistic talent. I think I've acquired a way of expressing my enthusiasm for this and for that and for the next thing by simply doing it, by kind of, almost artisanship. Then I was able to graduate from there and move to London to the Architectural Association, which is a very famous college. And some of my heroes that I was reading about in magazines were the people teaching me. Now that's a very privileged situation, so that by the time I came out and I worked in offices, I had to work in offices here and there. By the time Archigram started, I was, not only had I been taught by some of the most famous people of that moment, but the other members of the Archigram group, who all came from different universities and schools, some of them had also engaged with really key figures of the history of architecture. So we had learned at first hand from some of the actual people. It was not just all done from books and sitting on a mountaintop. It was actually being in there, which is one of the great things about London, that there always everybody comes through,
And the title, sir, was conferred for architecture, for your work in architecture.
Oh, the title, yes.
Yeah.
The title came because of, I think, what I did was unusual, but also because I had taken the department of University College in London, the Bartlett, which was in a very, very low state. It was almost going to be pushed out of the system, and I, in a very short time, revived it, and it started to get all the prizes, and now, years later, it's #1 in the world. So I had raised an institution very quickly. Again, I think not just through sort of pedagogic expertise, although I've also got medals for that, but because of enthusiasm and also being very interested in people. I'm not only interested in teachers because they represent a sort of architecture this or a sort of architecture. I'm interested if they're interesting people and if they can inspire the students also. You know, I think it's very, very important. I'm not pedantic. I don't want them to be people who tell the student everything they have to read. I'm more interested if they get the students' enthusiasm and creative juices running. So that part of it, and it seemed to work, clearly. That's why, yeah, I mean, knighthoods are very strange. I'm also a member of the Royal Academy, you know, and the reasons why you get into these things, it's very English, it's very sort of circuitous and sort of, people have to like you. Well, not always. I mean, there's some nasty people who get elected to things, but I mean, generally it's because they say, this guy's good for the, you know, he's done something that's kept it moving. My wife was very surprised because she said most people who get knighted seem to be fairly wealthy, and we're not very wealthy. But I said, well, that proves that they like the occasional eccentric case.
Now, you've also found Archigram, which was revolutionary in the year 1960.
Yep.
Now, what was the main vision behind the performing of Archigram, and how do you think it influenced the modern architecture?
Well, it's almost an extension of the same issue of enthusiasm and passion about wanting architecture to keep moving forward. And I found, in London, parallel minds, if you like. You know, although I would say of the 6 original members of Archigram, we were very different. They were 10 years from the oldest to the youngest. We all came from different colleges. We had different tastes in clothes, in girlfriends, in music, in food, probably. So we weren't all just one little. We were the sum of. We were like a coalition of people, a sum of many different positions, but on the same side of the firing line, or certain shared things, which gave us extra power, I think. Had we all been from the same college, the same age, it would have been softer and not so effective. We were able to draw on the resources of 6 different minds, if you like. And I think it's also to do with the period. It's also to do, we felt we were not the children of the Second World War. We were the people who emerged after that. So we were not, you know, we hadn't been in that war, but we were the young kids that benefited in a way a lot from the inventions that were made in the 40s and the 50s. And also we were largely influenced by the art schools, by the art scene. So it's a combination of the invention thing, which I think in England is still a very important, you know, I think we're good at inventing things. We're not so good at producing in quantity, but I think there are a lot of people who come up with unusual ideas. They go into a hut in the back of a yard and then they come out with this strange thing that seems to do something funny. We were part of that, and we were part of the art school scene, and we were of a certain generation, and the modernism had reached a point which was almost ready to ossify. And it needed a twist. I don't say postmodernism, which was something different, but it needed modernism to be brought back to its origins of invention. Archigram is an architectural gram, like a telegram.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is, the name is quite interesting for sure.
Yeah. It's a gram. It was just a sheet. It was a news sheet, really. we're about, strangely enough, to bring out another Archigram issue after a big gap, many
Right.
years, which will be very with much younger people in it, and ourselves. It'd be really interesting to see how this is reacted to, because it has many of the same instincts, though the technologies represented are different. Be interesting to see if that resonates. Yeah.
So, the walking city and plug-in city are some of the Archigram's most famous concepts. Could you tell us about the ideas behind these projects and the impact that it had on the contemporary architectural thinking?
Yes, I mean, the Walking City was produced by my late friend Ron Heron, and Plug-in City was produced by me, and they were more or less developed at the same time. Walking City, I think, is much more rhetorical. It's amazing to say a city can be a total component, and it can move rather like, I think the nearest equivalent is an aircraft carrier, which is or a giant liner, which is virtually a whole city that moves. But there had been other sort of total cities. I think in history you could say that Le Corbusier's Unité d'Habitation in Marseille is also a total city. It didn't move, but the notion of a building, a single building, a city, and his was an extension of that. My plug-in city is more componented and based upon the notion that you have a big structure, a mega structure, and then you can put pieces in and take them out. I mean, a very important part of plug-in city was the notion of exchangeability, that it wouldn't sit just all sitting like it sits like there, we see, but the parts would change whilst keeping the continual structure rolling. And they were exactly contemporary. I mean, we were working in the same office in the daytime, but we
which year are we talking about? This, the ideas?
We're talking about 1964, 64, 65, that period. And then we both developed later projects which were even more mobilized, you know. Instant City, we both did a version of Instant City, and then the things began to melt. But Archigram, these things were always evolving. You know, there are lots of sub-projects that you could see as embryo versions of those projects, or things that came after, or things where they're melted or changed. It wasn't just a sort of, he's doing that and I'm doing this. It was much more fluid than that.
Now, your teaching and influence. So as we also discussed about you reviving a particular institution, you've had a significant impact as an educator. Now, how has teaching influenced your own work and the architectural philosophy?
I think I've been very lucky to be teaching in places that attracted very good students. And I've learned as much from my students, or more from my students, than they've learned from me. I mean, if you surround yourself with very bright people, but you're also involved in the process of helping them communicate, develop, refine, articulate, explode, and that rubs off on you. And then also, as I moved up the sort of hierarchy of teaching, you encourage people to come and teach who are cleverer than yourself and who are down the corridor. You know, however damn clever I think I am. You know, there was Ram Koolhaas down the end of the corridor, there's Zaha in the next room. You know, and a lot of other people who are less well known but who are significant. And including now,
So Zaha was your student as well?
No, she wasn't technically my student. She was teaching. She was a student when I was teaching, but she was not my student.
Okay.
And then later she came to teach, and then she was in the next door room.
Okay.
Similarly with Rem. And these people, Zaha was in particular a very close friend of myself and my wife for many, many years. We were part of her little coterie. And, we're different, but had many common attitudes to things and many common friends. We're part of a small circuit of friends, really.
No, we can also feel the effect of your teaching influence, like how we have witnessed so many of your students at this event.
Yes, they're coming
It
out
is
of the
a
woodwork.
total coincidence because just here 4-5 of them, like you said, right? Like I know one Muhammad Adib very closely, who is your student. So I can imagine it has definitely had a
Yes,
huge impact.
and I keep coming back to the term enthusiasm because I think it's very important to say that I am, in a primary sense, still a functionalist architect. I still think of how things work. I'm not interested in just the shape and then, oh God, we'll try and figure out how it works afterwards. I still say, we're in a hotel, it's of a certain size, it needs a certain number of elevators, it needs a certain breathing space, it needs to have a bar, it needs to have a wind coming through the bar, These are things that you grow up with. I'm not for saying there's a shape. Okay. There's a lot of shapist architecture. Even I showed the first project I showed is a shape. But its origin was in looking at the site and organizing the site and then enclosing it, and then finding that enclosure wanted to do a certain sort of thing organically. Then it starts looking like an interesting shape, but only at that point. But in teaching, I think the other thing is to try and make the architecture that comes out of somebody to do with them. So in a lot of my teaching, I've always been very interested in the person themselves, their story. What about their boyfriend? What about their mother? What about their city? What about their wooden leg? What about their, preference for eating pretzels or whatever it might be? All these things are relevant. I don't just say, this is the sort of architecture I do, that's what you're going to do in my class. Much more interested in saying, oh, really? You come from Glasgow? Yeah, do you know so-and-so? Do you know that funny place? What is your attitude towards certain things in Glasgow? What do you think about Edinburgh? And get round and something will come out in the conversation. They'll start telling you about their aunt or their dog or their the habit thing that they keep pigeons or do woodwork or something. Then you're onto something. You've got an angle to them. And often I find in architectural conversation I'm using the fact that they used to do woodwork or they like dogs. Sounds irrelevant, but can lead to really interesting. You get to know them. And I think this is very important.
Oh, interesting. Now, CB8 Studio, again, you've continued to push the architectural boundaries here. Are there any recent projects that you found particularly exciting?
Well, yes,
Something
I
that
mean,
you
the
want to
ones
share?
that I can't show. We've been doing a lot of stuff on Neom, as you know, and different parts of Neom, and we're still engaged with a couple of those. Places that people like to go to, like the old town here, they're not made of grey chunks. They happen really not to be grey chunks, and yet we expect people to live in grey chunks. Something odd there. I hope that the things that the edges of the grey chunks can have also some colour and some form. And that they have to work, that the staircase has to be in the right place and the floor to depth ratio is sensible, and the elevators work and you deal with the cyclists, etc. That comes as a priori, and I'm still aware of that because I'm an old functionalist. I quite enjoy, saying that's too long for people to walk, that's too close, that's too narrow, that's not comfortable. I know that I'm into that stuff, and then I say, but what more can we do? Wait a minute. Yes, we make it comfortable, we make it work, and there's a funny thing at the end of the corridor. There's a piece of interest in the corner. There's some colour to release from this grey chunk world.
Is there anyone that inspires you with their design and functionality in the current set of?
I mean, I know it's not necessarily fashionable to say so, but I am a great admirer of Frank Gehry.
Okay.
And he's also a personal friend, and I've been in many of his buildings, and every time we're in Los Angeles, and our son lives in Los Angeles, so we go fairly often to Los Angeles, and we always go and see Frank. And he takes us around the office to see what he's working on right now, even just a few weeks ago. And he's so creative. So, whether you would like the actual mannerism or not, it's almost not the point. He's immensely still, and he's older than me, and he's still immensely creative. And he knows the stuff that's going on in the office. He knows it intimately. He can take you over there and say, now, we're trying this funny thing here, we're making a couple of models, and look, this is the new material I'm using. And he uses his hands, and he works it, and he's a great inspiration. Tremendously so. I mean, I mention him almost primarily. There are many other people. I'm very inspired by some of my close friends who are working in experimental architecture using biotechnology. Growing buildings, growing the surface of buildings, growing algae and and I have quite a number of friends who are really good engineers. I've always been quite close to certain engineers, and I'm not one of those architects who says, we've done the scheme, oh my God, the engineers are going to come and screw it up. I like talking to the engineers first and say, hey, really, can we do that? Can we really do that? And then they say, yeah, we can really do that. And the building gets much better.
Yeah. With the current trends in architecture, which one, like amongst the trends, which one do you particularly find either exciting or transformative?
Well, I just mentioned the biotechnologies. I think the fact that the materiality, not just the materiality, but the functional material, the fact that the language of architecture or the vocabulary of architecture is so slow to move, can we look up there, is a challenge. I think that a lot of my work has been saying as a sort of subtext, let us extend the vocabulary. Let's see what else it can be made of. Let's see what, not just in terms of organization, but in terms of substance. And that my younger friends are the interesting ones, are pushing architecture away from the solid, or away from the static, to the developmental, that it can grow, it can have additions, it can be more subtle, it can be more environmentally friendly. And that these things are all linked. And that really inspires me. So on the one hand, I have the inspiration of this old architect in LA, still with his mind extremely highly, much more creative than most 30-year-olds. On the one hand, and then other people mostly working in certain very particular large offices, or mostly in academia, on the edges of academia, who are developing technologies and materials, and out of them come forms. So these things, you know, there are plenty of people out there that inspire me. And I feel very sort of old-fashioned and humble and in the light of them sometimes.
How do you approach sustainability in your projects, your thinking, and how do you?
I think sustainability, it's very interesting because it has become, in the last, say, 15 years, I mean, it's you as an interviewer have to ask me that question. Everybody does. It's almost
No,
like
I also think it's a very important subject that needs more, you know, ideas. And
Yes.
if you look at this event as well, we have one of the reasons why we bring it to Europe and fly people from, you know, other regions like Saudi is because we know there are more companies which are investing on research and development, bringing materials
yes,
that
and
are
I
sustainable.
think we have to be prepared for that to make dramatic changes to the manner of substance. You know, that if we have the idea of degradability, some people see as a negative, but can be a positive. And in a funny way, there's a loop back to when we were talking about expendability and exchange. Degradability is a very interesting notion because it means there's a sort of organic force where you say the substance has to rebuild itself. It has to, and maybe even replaced, but not completely replaced. So if you think of the old Japanese temples, where they reconstruct them every 100 years in the same form but with new pieces of wood. That's not exactly sustainability, but there's a parallel there that time is moving. And, you know, an area of sustainability that intrigues me is with the effect of global warming. We can resist it, but perhaps it's still cyclically happening. And I think, yes, it is a lot due to the fact that we produce a lot of carbon in the air and so on, but it's still also probably happening in a natural cycle. So as the floods come up, instead of wringing your hands, we say, okay, what happens to the city when the water table has come up 3 meters, 6 meters, whatever? It's still livable in, livable on, floatable on, maybe. You know, we have to think the context. Also the same thing with, I mean, some years ago we won a competition which they in the end never built for some solar houses. And I had to retrain for a month to get to know all about solar heating. And some of it was intriguing because it was actually back to old sort of farmhouse law of how you did certain things with the north wall, the south wall, and so on. But it also enabled us to do quite free thinking. We suddenly freed ourselves from the notion of the sort of North European house. But now, of course, the solar technology is much more refined. You don't have to have a house with a wall doing that to collect it. And you don't have to have a big sort of set of sheets of material that can be distributed. But it was a great enjoyment to think you could do more than just make the structure. You can actually make it live with the circumstance that you have. And I think sustainability is to do with that also. There's a lot of bullshit involved. I mean, we did a building in Australia where the adjoining building had got a grade 5-star sustainability rating in Australia. And they wanted ours to get, because they got one with 5 star, they want ours to be 5 star. And there were all sorts of tricks we discovered that they'd use of saying, you know, we used some steel that was taken from an old ship. We used some wood that had been used on the railroad, but we did this, and then they do all sorts of elaborate formula. It looked to me a pretty ordinary building that didn't, the rooms were not cooler than they would have been. The corridors were not special, but it had done a lot of sort of calculating tricks to make it get this 5-star. We also designed it to head that way, and the client simply hadn't got the money. They said, if we do your version of the 5-star, it's going to cost a third more for the building, and we want that building, and we've got to open it in 2 years' time because students are waiting to move into it. So we got it, I don't know, 4-star or something, whatever. And so it's a very curious thing. I'm not sure that it's an interesting parallel. I think there tend to be architects who make sustainability their total position. And they tend to be people who really want to be scientists. And there are other architects who say, okay, we will tick the boxes, but don't really take much interest in the components. I'm interested in the components. I'm interested in the substance. Back to vocabulary. I think the technologies and materials and attitudes to the substance and what happens to it is part of the same conversation of saying we must extend the vocabulary. The vocabulary has to extend to incorporate and develop the attitude of material to time. That might be sometimes uncomfortable. Might mean that sometimes you get buildings that are very strange. Whereas again, if I look out the window here and I see these grey buildings with square windows in them, I think maybe they've managed to find a sustainability factor by making walls a certain thickness, but it's just a sort of tick boxing activity. And still, they're really boring buildings.
You spent like 50 years in design and architecture of your life. What, like, if you think of it at this particular moment, what do you think really the field of architecture should contribute? I mean, of course, great design, sustainable buildings, all this is there, but what do you think should the architecture contribute to the mankind?
I think it should enliven. Actually, I think if I say one thing it should do all the other things, but it should also enliven. It should protect, it should sustain, it should enable. You know, particularly now in many countries we have a housing problem.
Yeah.
You know, we have to face that, and housing takes space, however you design it. And that has to be taken on board, and there's a battle then between saying, you know, if we have only a medium-sized country, we're not a giant country, we're not a tiny country, we're a middle-sized country. And already we have, you know, 10 million people who don't easily have somewhere to live.
Absolutely.
And putting those people out in the, you know, we have a small amount of landscape and so on. So if you stick 10 million people out in the landscape, you probably notice it, you know. And so we have to think of techniques by compacting in some cases, reusing in some cases, maybe building in the water, maybe building into the water, you know. But I think these are interesting issues. I'm not fearful of that. I think we need our best brains on the case, not people who just repeat with the same. I keep pointing out of the window because I look at this roofscape and I think, this is supposed to be a beautiful city, but it's pretty standard looking stuff, the mountains in the background, but this part of the city anyhow is
what do you want the future aspiring architects to be mainly? I mean, of course, they, like you suggested, each one can
inventive, and also observational. I think that I'm now
people
suddenly the old
less
person,
observe and talk more.
more observant. And also the problem is that they run straight to the screen. You say, we've got this task is to do an art museum. Maybe just done a project for an art museum. Okay, I've done one before, so that helps. And I do drawings. I know about art galleries and so on. But they run to the screen and say, well, this person did this art museum. This person did this and this and this and this and this. And I say, but when did you last go to an art museum? What do you remember about it? What did you enjoy? And sometimes they say, they might say something like, well, actually, I spent more time in the shop than in the gallery. Why? Because it's more concentrated. Or they might say, I enjoyed the sort of first part of it, but I got bored as I had to keep moving up level upon level upon level. They're things that come from the experience. I think I want people to look out the window. That's why I keep referring to what we're seeing here, because it's, instead of me talking abstractly about boring grey buildings, there they are. So it reminds me that irritates me and upsets me. Look and invent.
You still spend time reading and understanding what trends are happening around the world? Do you still read?
Yeah, I probably don't read as much as I used to. I don't know, you mean read technical stuff?
Not the technical ones. Like, for example, if I may ask you, according to you and your travels and the things, which country or group of countries are doing better in terms of architecture, keeping in mind all the principles that you're talking about?
Well, the country that I consistently find the most interesting is Japan.
Oh.
I think Japan has a very intriguing culture which has some parallels with the English culture.
Okay.
They're both damp islands off the coast of the mainland who take most of their culture from the mainland and then distort it, turn it upside down. They're also quite amusing people. They're quite vicious but quite funny.
Okay.
If you know a lot of Japanese, and the English have a very similar cruel sense of humor and turn things on their side. Both countries like making jokes. They just like silly things, but they both have a royal family in the middle that looks as if, and they're both supposed to be polite, but actually they're not really very polite. A lot of parallels. They drive on the left. They have a lot of wet.
That's a very interesting way of looking at it. You speak Japanese? Do you?
No, I wish I did. But I have a lot of. I've been many times to Japan. I have a lot of Japanese friends, and I still find Tokyo and principally Tokyo.
Do you know the world's oldest company is a Japanese construction company?
Kajima? Yeah, is it Kajima?
I mean, I don't remember the name, but I do know
I
the
think
world's.
it's Kajima. I think it's
Yeah,
Kajima.
they've been in business for like 1600 years now, and they still continue to be.
I like that.
And
but that's
coincidentally, it's
typical-
a construction company.
Yeah, and I like that because they're probably very perverse guys inside it. We get a great buzz, and my son, who's I say in the music business, he also does work with Japanese singers. It's also. We used to take him when he was a little tiny kid. When we were going, and then now he goes of his own necessity to do deals or. Yeah.
Well, so that was the legendary Sir Peter Cook.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for all the insights and all the highlights you gave us.
Nice questions, anyway.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
this is at the sidelines of the 15th Red Summit here at the beautiful Palma. I thank you very much, Sir Peter Cook.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate your time very much.
It's nice and cool on here. It's great. Great place to sit anyway, whether we're recording or not.
Thank you.
Thank you.